Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Unscripted. Today I am super excited to have Adam Braun on. Adam, how's it going?
Doing well, doing really well.
Awesome. So Adam is the CEO and co-founder of Clarasight. Adam, for our audience, tell us what your organization does.
Clarasight is a carbon planning and intelligence software solution for companies, in particular large enterprises, to help them power emissions reporting, forecasting, planning, and management. And we solved a very specific problem. And that's in a world in which companies are expected to grow revenue, grow headcount, and at the same time, reduce their emissions. That creates a fundamental tension. And we believe that the key to solving that is to bring the same capabilities that you have with your financial planning into emissions planning. And that's what we do, working with some of the world's largest and most complex and well-known companies.
That's awesome. And as you know, we're big on sustainability at Logitech. We've been working on it for quite a while. And I will say the number one question we get from customers is where do I start? How do I plan for all this stuff? How do I what are the mechanics and the finances around this? So you've got a great product that can help jumpstart and then run it right until they get to the stance that they want to get to, carbon neutral or climate positive, et cetera, et cetera. So we met at LogiWork. So LogiWork is our premier event in the United States. We've done some internationally as well, but we started late in the year last year in 2024. So you were our keynote presenter and everyone was just dazzled, right, with you on stage. I think you had a lot of great things to talk about, but I didn't know about your story. So why don't you start with Pencils of Promise? Because that's just really, really inspiring. And then also about the book that came right after.
Sure. So the journey that I've been on is pretty non-traditional, but it did start in some relatively traditional elements of the path. So I grew up as a kid about an hour outside of New York City, had a really deep interest in trying to one day work in finance. That's not the background that my parents had, but I was pretty competitive and I was good at math, and some of my friends' parents worked in that space. And so, I thought I was kind of angling towards that career, but I went on a program called Semester at Sea when I was 21, and I had a series of life-changing experiences, but one of the most powerful of those was that I had a habit of asking one child per country in every country that I went through a very simple question. And that was, if you could have anything in the world, what would you want most? And I'd ask them to write that down on a piece of paper. And I thought I'd have this collage of global interests of children. And when I got to India, where the poverty was just the most devastating that I had ever seen at that point in my life, I felt very helpless. And I happened to ask this young boy who was a street beggar, if you could have anything, what would you want most in the world? And his answer was a pencil. And what I learned was that he had never been to school before, and that there was a tremendous amount of wisdom in that request. And that what he was really asking for was this tool to unlock his own sense of curiosity and imagination and ultimately potential, which a synonym for that is promise.
Yeah.
And so years later, I found myself working at Bain, and on the side of my job, decided to put $25 into a bank account to start this new organization called Pencils of Promise, in hopes of crowdsourcing through small contributions the funds to build one school somewhere in a rural community. I'd backpacked through many of them in my early 20s that did not have access for their children to experience true formal education, and eventually left my job to pursue building this organization out of my little apartment in the East Village in Manhattan. Fast forward, it's been 16 years. We've now built over 600 schools around the world, about 250,000 students in our programs every day. And I'm no longer the day-to-day CEO, although I was for many, many years. Now I'm the board chair, but we've had this incredible impact collectively through many, many people that have gotten involved in ways small and large. And along the way, I wrote a book as we approached the groundbreaking of our 100th school. Called The Promise of a Pencil. But what's really important is the subtitle, which is how an ordinary person can create extraordinary change. And I took the best lessons that I had learned from the most remarkable leaders, whether it was rural village chiefs or CEOs of Fortune 500 companies that I was spending time with, and tried to codify that into 30 simple, short, powerful mantras or lessons, and titled each chapter with one of those mantras, and then illustrated those through story, through narrative. And fortunately, the book, really took off when it came out. It was number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list at its debut week, and eventually became the number 1 book in the country. And, as a result of that, I've had the very good fortune to spend time with even more incredible leaders and try and, bring the great lessons of innovation and leadership that I've been able to accrue from time spent with them and try and spread the good word on those to others.
That's amazing. I mean, I would have said 1 or 2 schools would be amazing, but 100 to have accomplished that, you've got to feel good. You've really got to feel great that you made a difference in the world.
Yeah, I think everything is relative, right? And so it's amazing how, that first school did feel like a somewhat impossible dream. I remember literally, shedding tears at that first school opening, leaving that school opening. I was really immersed in that community, knew them so well. And then suddenly it becomes, you achieve much, much bigger goals than your original aspirations. We got to 100, then we got to 200. I remember recording a video at the time of our 100th school as we were approaching it to kind of promote this idea that we were going to potentially break ground on our 100th school. And I was doing the voiceover, and the person in the studio that was recording said, "Hey, just change that line where you say, we've now broken ground on our 100th school to 200, and then record a 300th and maybe even a 400th, just in case you ever get there one day." And I remember thinking, this is wild, that's so far out. And, now we're at 600 and the video can't be used because I never recorded a voiceover that went that high.
It's interesting. I remember when you were speaking at Logitech's event in San Jose, one of your concluding thoughts was just do something, even if it's little. You don't know what the kind of ripple effect that's going to have. And the ripple effect came from that unfortunate ship incident you had, right, while you were on semester C. Luckily, everyone was fine. But it's so important. Like, just don't wait, right? Do something, like even if it's small. And I did feel walking away from your presentation, I'm like, I'm not doing enough for the world or for other people. I'm just not. And so now I think we're collectively as a family trying to figure out how can we do that ourselves, but then also instill that in our own kids. And we actually had a sidebar conversation about that, right? How do you make your kids, the next generation, more aware of your surroundings, people that are less fortunate, and then close the gap for them so they can have a chance at a great life?
As a parent now, it's a very different lens through which I look at the world, and everything to some extent is kind of refracted through this concept of how can I instill the right values in our children? How can I set them up to live a fulfilling and a happy and a meaningful life? And it's tough, right? When you raise your kids in a context that's very different from how a lot of the rest of the world lives in reality. Just by being on the soil of the United States, you're living differently from the majority of the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And so, the things that I've taken both from the way that my parents raised us and saw my grandparents raise my parents and my wife's parents as well, is one, to have appreciation and really try and instill a sense of gratitude in both the good and the bad, and to look at challenge as an opportunity for growth and for learning, right? I think we can all acknowledge that most of our personal and professional growth probably came in moments of sincere and significant adversity.
Yeah.
But that point that you touch on that I spoke about at the end of that keynote at the Logia Work event was this idea of tipping a 1 millimeter domino.
Yeah.
And, I showed a really powerful video in which this professor tips a series of sequential dominoes that just get a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. And he references that within 29 steps from a 1 millimeter on upwards, it would be as tall as the Empire State Building. And I find that for many of us that have big aspirations, we experience a sense of paralysis, or we just don't move forward because we're so fixated on the kind of monolithic big success, and it feels so impossible to achieve that. But my encouragement is always, it's okay to start small. Just take one step, put that foot in front of one another, and continue to take bigger and bigger steps, and remarkable things will happen.
There's some truth in celebrating the small wins and then building upon that, right? Like I think when I was younger, it was always the big things, the big jumps. What big change can I make in my life? What, can I get promoted to vice president? Like ridiculous stuff like that, even though I was not even manager at the time. But now I celebrate the smaller wins. Part of it is just maybe you don't learn sometimes. Sometimes it's just age, right? You just have a lot of experience. You do a lot of different jobs, and you realize that sometimes the smaller wins are way more beneficial, and it affects more people positively.
I think one other thing is just to celebrate any form of a win. Something that you just touched on is, as we progress through our lives and careers, I find early on you celebrate a win because it feels so big.
Yeah.
And then what we experience very frequently is as soon as we get to whatever big aspirational milestone that we had originally set our sights on, we immediately move that goalpost way off into the horizon where it's now a new challenge. And that's a wonderful thing, and it's important to do. But I also find that I have to remind myself, remind my teammates. We just did an offsite at Clarasight over the last 2 days, and we talked about what are some of the best cultures that we've all been a part of, and how can we bring some of those experiences into the culture that we're building at Clarasight now that the team continues to grow very significantly. And one of the best elements of one of the best cultures I was ever a part of really captured this word celebratory. When something great happened, we celebrated. And I've been part of cultures where you work really, really hard. And I think it's important for all of us to remember that it's important to celebrate the wins when you actually get them, and to not just go right back, heads down into work mode.
Yeah. So you've got a lot on your plate. I mean, you've obviously got Pencils of Promise. I know you're limited capacity now, but that's still running and still going. You still have the overwhelming success of your New York bestsellers book. And then you have Clarasight, which is in itself is fantastic because a lot of people really need help with that kind of insight, let's just say, on sustainability, how to get it done. The other thing I know you do is you consult with organizations, you coach, you manage, you do a lot of presentations. Talk about that, because that's important based just on your experience. I know there's a lot you can offer, but I'm curious as to what companies get out of it. What would they look forward to if they engage you in something like that?
Yeah. So, it's been almost this surprising part of the professional experience that many companies and associations have asked me to come in and deliver talks over the years. And, like all things, at least the way that I approach it is the same way that when I decided to, become fixated on hopefully playing college basketball one day, which eventually occurred, I wanted to become a kind of student of that particular science, right? And so as Pencils of Promise was growing in its early years, and I was asked, to start delivering talks in front of companies and large groups of people, I started to really obsess over what is it that makes a great presentation? What is it that enables a keynote speaker to really move a room? And eventually it just became a pretty substantial part of my life and career. And, today, as you alluded to, I have several roles, right? I'm the day-to-day CEO at Clarasight. And, we work with enterprises that in aggregate have over $3.5 billion of market cap. And, we're now managing a tremendous amount of the emissions that they are generating, and not just backwards looking reporting akin to carbon accounting. That's not what we do. We complement companies' carbon accounting. We're really powering that forward looking emissions forecasting, planning, and management. And what I found is when you work with large companies that are going through very substantial transformations, they're oftentimes looking for that kind of kernel of insight that relates to how do we drive some level of transformation. And given that, I've not really fortunately been a part of building and scaling several successful startups from scratch, I've also been invited into incredibly powerful rooms with very powerful people. And I really try and be a student in those contexts and absorb as much information as I can. And then when I have the opportunity to, get on stage and deliver in front of a company at, let's say, an offsite or an industry event or, a large association gathering, I'm always trying to bring those insights around innovation, leadership, resilience, change management into that presentation, but I do it through story. And I think that's probably what you saw at the Logitech event, is that at my core, I'm a storyteller. I want it to be fun. I want it to be engaging and still incorporate, the elements of data and science so that every person in that room has something actionable that they can take away and apply to either their team professionally, their family at home, or their community, or any initiative that they're really, caring about and passionate to find success within.
Well, you delivered that because everyone remembers the stories you told. They remember if anything, they remember the video of the ship with all the windows getting blown out. So that's going to be permanently. The fact that you've already been on a ship after that is amazing, because I would have probably never set foot on a vessel like that again. Just real quick, if someone, you probably give a lot of leaders, teams of people, a lot of advice. What's the one thing that comes up and they're like, wow, I'm really glad you talked about that, and this is like a positive difference I'm going to make in my life? Is there like the one thing that people are surprised about and then go do it?
So one of the things that I've spoken about, I didn't incorporate this into the Logitech event that I was at with you, but something that I've delivered in certain talks that I feel like people will find me years later and say, you encourage this one idea and I've really adopted it and it's been transformative for me, is this notion of speaking the language of the person you seek to become, not who you are in this moment. And it's something that I adopted in the early days of Pencil Promise. I adopted it in the early days of Clarasight. But I find a lot of people, when you get in conversation with other individuals, you speak about yourself in the present and you speak about your experiences in the present. And yet at the same time, in the back of your mind, you might have these aspirational dreams that you're a little bit fearful to even reveal.
Yeah.
And what I've encouraged folks to adopt is this mindset where you don't speak about yourself in the present, you speak in the language of the person you seek to become. I am presently doing this, but one day I aspire to do that. And if you make the conversation about that aspirational self, what you find is you get pulled in that direction because your conversations start to become about that future vision that you are trying to enable. And that person on the other side of the table or at the other side of, let's say the screen in a modern context, they're going to want to help you figure that out. And so they'll oftentimes ask you great questions, but then at the end, they'll facilitate introductions that will pull you in that direction. And that idea, I've shared with a lot of folks. I write about it in the book. And many years later, I've had a lot of people come up to me and say, I've adopted that and it's been really transformative.
That's great. I'm going to try that. Now, I've heard something similar like this in the past, but not actually. I think yours is more impactful. Dress for the job you want, not the job you have, right? That's one. Like always look professional, look the part. But that's just clothes. That's just material stuff. I mean, yeah, it sort of matters maybe, but a mindset change, the way you carry yourself, the way you speak about it, that's very impactful. That's where confidence also comes from, right? A lot of people are sometimes maybe overconfident, but if they're confident about it, you can sell the idea. Just look at Shark Tank as an example, right?
Exactly. And it's a way to really pressure test and start to get this idea of what you are trying to accomplish in the future somewhat out in the world where you get feedback on it without, creating, call it the level of risk and fear and trepidation of fully jumping in the pond and saying, okay, I'm not doing this fully. But if you just speak in that language, in my case, at one point in time, I was a consultant at Bain. And I just started saying when I met people, well, one day I'm going to start an organization that's going to build schools around the world. And then eventually, in the precursor to Clarasight, I just told people I want to build a software company that's going to help enterprises be able to confidently make progress against their emissions targets. And just talking about, okay, well, how would you do that? And, you find ways to get this bold aspiration out of your mind and into the world. And you start to see really powerful things occur that help it come to fruition.
That's awesome. Adam, we could talk for hours, I'm sure. And we did already once before. So just in the interest of time, one, I wanted to thank you for being on. Thank you for what you do. You've done so much for the world. I mentioned this before. It's inspirational. When you see the work behind it's one thing to talk about doing something. You've actually done it, right? Like I said, 2 schools would have been amazing. You've done 100. And I know it's with other people as well. So I get it. It's not all on your shoulders, but you started it. So congratulations. I wish you nothing but the best of luck. For those of you that are listening in, if you want to get in touch with Adam, I'll have his link and everything else in the link of the post as well. And otherwise, look at clarasight.com. Adam, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for the kind invite. It's really an honor.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adam. And that's it, folks. That is another episode of Unscripted. Catch us next time.